another Wind Down Wednesday with me, Janelle, back at Mi Casa, Ma Maison. So what I want to talk to you about tonight is Jewish guilt. And you may be wondering to yourself, how do I know anything about Jewish guilt if I'm not Jewish? Well, as it turns out, my mother raised me using the tactics of Jewish guilt. And what is that exactly? Finding sort of ways to make you behave by making sure that you be feeling so bad if you did anything wrong that you'd never forgive yourself. I think my mom's favorite line growing up was, you'd never want to do anything to make your father cry, would you? Okay, like really, no, I would never want to do anything to make my father cry. So my whole life, I would sometimes like err on the side of danger, and every time I did, my mother's words, even to this day, come into my head. You never want to do anything to make your father cry, okay? So, I do remember the time I actually did make my father cry, and it stands out as a painful memory for me in my mind. I'd broken up with my boyfriend, and for some reason, now I'm like, whatever, but I was devastated. It was Christmas holidays, and I was at home, and I was miserable, and I was crying, and I really was not myself. And I remember my dad standing at the door saying goodbye to me because I was driving back to Winnipeg at the time. And he just burst out in tears and he said, he like literally milled to me, said, I'm so sad that you're so sad and I want to take away your pain and I can't stand seeing you like this. And you know, I still feel badly about that. To this day I feel badly that I put my father in that kind of pain. So this Jewish guilt thing has worked throughout my whole life. And in fact, my mother's still using it on me during coronavirus. She's like, now, don't get yourself sick now. Don't do anything to catch coronavirus. And I can tell when I tell them I've gone out for dinner with a friend or something, it's like, well, you were wearing your mask and you were sitting far apart. And I'm like, yeah. But, my mom's like, hey, if you get sick, I can't come there and take care of you. Jewish guilt is rearing its head again. Yes. Anyway, so you have to wonder, where did my mom, little Norwegian, 100% pure-blooded Norwegian, living in Canada, kind of like out in the middle of nowhere, kind of learn about Jewish guilt? Well, as it turns out, I had one of my first boyfriends, of course, after the guy that made my father cry because I was crying so much, happened to be Jewish, and he thought it was kind of funny because I used words like schlep, I don't feel like schlepping a large bag, well, that guy's a putz, and he's like, so where did you learn to speak Yiddish? And I looked at him and I'm like, and he was living in the States and I was still living in Canada at this time. And I looked at him, I'm like, what do you mean? I'm not talking Yiddish, I'm talking Norwegian, Scandinavian. And he looked at me and I said, yeah, it's Scandinavian, that's how my mom talks, and that's how my grandma talks, and that's how my grandpa talked, and it's not Yiddish, you can't take ownership of that, it's Norwegian. Well, he managed to suppress a laugh, and he's like, look, we're speaking, it's Yiddish, these are Yiddish words, passed down for generations, and I'm like, well, I don't know what to say. So I go home and I talk to my mom, and I'm like, so Mom and Dad, we're just sitting there, and I said, boyfriend tells me that these words that I've been using are not Norwegian at all, that, he thinks they're Yiddish. Can you imagine that? And my mom, she said, well, when your great-grandparents moved here from Norway, and when they had your respective, like, grandma and grandpa, of course, not the same parents, like, not that kinky, I'm not saying, we're not talking Amish here. He said your grandfather worked, your grandfather and your grandmother's parents both worked the farms for some of the local farmers. And, one was named Hofer, and they were definitely a Jewish family, and that's where my grandmother grew up. And so all the English they learned was from the Hofers, who spoke Yiddish. Okay, so all of a sudden made sense to me. So my grandmother and grandfather, who both spoke fluent Norwegian and very little English, and the English my grandmother did speak was peppered with Yiddish expressions, which my family naturally assumed were Norwegian words. Okay, so I have to go back with my tail between my legs to the Jewish boyfriend and say to him, you may have been right. Maybe. Yiddish words, I explained the whole story, so I guess you can have putz and you can have schlep. So he thought it was pretty humorous, and Anyway, so then they decided, him and his friends, that they're going to teach me. He goes, well, what exactly is a putz? I'm like, it's like a loser. He goes, yeah, but let me teach you some more Yiddish. A man with no guilt is a putz. I'm like, what's guilt? And he's like, money. So over the next, course of my dating him, I learned a lot of Yiddish words. Some I will not repeat because they're a little bit racist. You maybe know the ones I'm talking about if you're Jewish. But yeah, I learned to embrace his community and the Judaism and Jewishness and all that stuff, and had to inform the rest of my family that they weren't speaking Norwegian when they said those words. Norwegian is like, oh yes, nam, garbita board, the spesta drink and part the door, the good, the lad, the asagam, safari, oh yes and no. That's a grace my grandmother taught me. And there was no putz or schlep or anything like that in there. Anyway, on that note, I guess that's where my mom learned the art of Jewish guilt, because it still works on me today. And what can I say? I've never been arrested, never got into trouble, never did drugs. I barely drink. I mean, it's the odd glass of wine down Wednesday, right? Anyway, on that note, it was kind of a funny aside, and I think it's okay for parents that install a little guilt in their kids. Because at the end of the day, you want your kid to be a good kid, right? So if you have to use tactics like you never want to do anything to make your father cry, or don't do anything to get coronavirus, not like I'm walking around going, I'm just going to get the coronavirus, Like, I'm being as careful as I can be, but at a certain point, I still need to live like I'm alive, I don't want to live like I'm not alive, if you get my drift, but doing so carefully. On that note, I hope you have a great week. Glass half full mentality. Got a little Billy Idol in the background. Have a good day, you all. Oy vey. I'm not sure what to say. It's so annoying. But I'm so annoying. And I'm so annoying, but I think I'm kind of adorably annoying, right? Anyway. And I'm dancing by myself, because that's what I do these days. In a quarantine, COVID world. Happy Wind Down Wednesday.